Empower your leadership journey with the CEO Series. Whether you're at the gym, strolling, or commuting, our impactful dialogues with world-class leaders are just a click away. Immerse yourself in the minds of visionaries shaping today's most influential companies and innovations. It's not just an interview. It's a masterclass in leadership. Don't miss out. Available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and major streaming platforms.
Good morning, good evening, depending upon what part of the world you're in. If it's Friday, it is the CEO Series, where we bring together the most inspiring leaders, entrepreneurs, innovators from across the globe to share their career journeys. And our guest today, as you saw the video just a few seconds ago, our guest today is Ed Berenhaus, who is a longtime friend. We worked together at Martha Stewart years ago. And he's going to walk us through his journey from TV to real estate. So, Ed, welcome. How are you?
I am well. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Good morning to my friends on the stateside. Looking forward to this. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you for being a guest. Interesting career. I know the background of it. Walk us through that. What was that like, leaving TV and now being one of the big shots of real estate in New York City?
Well, I enjoyed a 4-decade career in television. Filmmaking was always a passion of mine, inspired by my dad's home movies. He used to do what they used to call trick photography, things like single frame animation and slow motion and reversing the video. And I found that challenge kind of exciting as a kid, and took the first film course in New York City high schools, and eventually wound up at Stony Brook University, which is a math and science and medical science school. But they did have one film class, and they did have a radio station and photography classes, and I took them all. I actually founded a newsreel, a comedy newsreel, sort of satirical campus life, not unlike what Saturday Night Live did later on. And we used to show it to the students at the weekend movies. But that background got me into NBC as a page and tour guide, working on the original Saturday Night Live in 1975. It was a magical experience. I can tell you that it was brand new to have a live show on a network since the 50s, since the Uncle Milty days, the Sid Caesar days. And so being part of that was just extraordinary. I went from there into WNBC advertising and promotion, where I learned the ropes of TV advertising. We call it marketing today. And it basically was a place where I really got my feet wet in first print media and then online media. From there, I was asked to join a cable channel. And it was still a time when cable was brand new. It was called Satellite News Channel. It was a merger between ABC News and Group W, a 24-hour news station. It eventually got sold to Ted Turner for his CNN headline news.
I see.
Yeah, from there I was lucky enough to get to Paramount syndication, where I worked on a brand new show called Entertainment Tonight. The news people out there were laughing at the idea of entertainment news. So it was quite a journey to get the show, give the show credibility. And as you probably know, ET is still on today, 50 years later. It's always in the top 10. Yeah, that's when syndication was the only other sort of vehicle to get your show on the air other than what the networks produced. From there, I worked at a cable channel called Financial News Network. And they asked me to start up their promotion group, which I did. They had 3 day parts. They had financial news during the day, sports during the evening, and home shopping at night. And so it was very interesting and very challenging. I learned a lot in that job. I eventually moved away from there and went back to freelancing as a writer and producer. I was asked to work on the Joan Rivers show. Joan was an absolute doll. I produced her promos for about 3 years for her syndicated show, and it was really a joy to work with her. You know, unlike her stage persona, she was one of the nicest people I've ever met. And I went from there to work again as a freelancer, mostly for creative channels like Nick at Night, which had some of the greatest promotion of the 90s. And finally, I wound up at Martha Stewart when they were starting up a promotion department. And of course, that's where we crossed paths. They had previously had the promotion done by their syndicator, CBS iMark, and they wanted to bring it in-house. And I was there for about 3 years. And then I was invited to work at AOL in Dulles, Virginia, where I started up their online promotion group. It was called Member Education. This is when AOL was still a subscription service reaching about 27 million subscribers. You know, they had a paid wall that you had to pay something like $25 a month. Very different time. Let's see, from there, I went to freelancing again. I worked for quite a number of different kinds of companies, from local stations to the Food Network, to returning to AOL at some point, working with them. Continued to do this until 2015, which is when I actually started working in real estate. I can tell you more about it. You know.
Okay, cool. That's a journey. So when you think of those steps, as you look back on it now, was there a pivotal moment which kind of seared into your being to say, I want to make a change, I want to do something else, I want to try something else?
Well, around 2012, I started to explore other options. I worked with a streaming media service that was a forerunner of Zoom, but it was ahead of its time. It was very much the same format, where you could put 25 people on the screen and have whiteboards and lead conversations. It's exactly what Zoom does now. Of course, Zoom has a larger capacity, but no one was quick to embrace it. We did have a couple of longtime clients that, like Andy Cohen show, he would do a little after show on Zoom. And we had some success with others in the cable world, but they were kind of one-offs. So I didn't see that as a viable future for me. They eventually got sold to another streaming media service and have been folded in. They mostly do educational work now. So that was a little bit disappointing. And then I wound up working with a couple of other companies, creative services companies. But in 2015, I had the opportunity to go back to producing promos. It was a show that was loosely related to what Jerry Springer used to do, with all the fighting and all. Very difficult show to work on. And long story short, once I had mastered the format, which was very challenging, they had decided not to renew the show. And I was the first to be laid off. And I thought about it for a while and said, gee, I keep on winding up at these places, get good at the job, and then I move on. It's time that I build my own brand. And I've always had a fascination with New York architecture and the real estate that goes with it. And it was shows like $1 Million Listing. I said, if these guys can sell real estate, so can I. And with my marketing background, I thought I'd be able to work my way into it. And I was lucky enough to work with someone who I'd worked with in TV at one of the leading firms. And she was my mentor for a while, and actually moved over to the company I'm with now, Compass, which is here in New York. The headquarters are in New York. And she's there too. So it's kind of fun. We work together now. And it's very rewarding. I love helping people find their special place to call home, making dreams come true and all of that. It sounds a little cliched, but it's actually very rewarding.
Wow. So all of those learnings from TV and media and all of that, you were able to translate that or transfer that over to a different industry. Was it difficult to try and, okay, let me get into this new kind of business? Or were the learnings from the other side and all the disruptions you've had that you carried over?
Well, one thing I've learned along the way is to be open to learning anything. Uh,
Okay.
each each time I went from one business to another, there was another culture there. There was another process in how they worked with each other. There was new vocabulary. I like to joke about the fact when I went to AOL, someone said to me, "I'll ping you later," and I had to find out what ping meant. I didn't know at the time he meant to text me. It was that new. It was still something that
Yeah.
the whole vernacular down there is very different in Virginia than it is here in New York. So I had
Mm.
to adjust. I guess if I were to give advice, it would be open to new things all the time.
Mm.
And even if you're not interested in something, find out about it. I like to use Variety, the magazine, as an
Yeah.
example. They have sections on theater, on spoken word speaker series. Of course, they have TV, they have movies, they have radio, they have music. And I wasn't necessarily interested in all of that, but I always read Variety cover to cover when I
Mm.
subscribed to it, because I knew that at some point some of that information was going to come in handy.
Yeah.
Similarly, when I was in college, I learned about photography, which was just a sort of a hobby of mine, but it turned out to be a very big part of my career in video as a director and as someone who produced promos. So it's very handy to learn as much as you can about an industry, because somewhere along the way it will come in handy.
Yeah, so you mentioned learning because that was one of the questions I was going to ask, but that was going to come later. But I'll get into it now. You left one industry, you moved to another industry, but meanwhile, on the other side, you kept going to these different things. A lot of it was new, groundbreaking, and of the like. Learning in today's climate, you have to stay abreast of everything that's happening in your industry. You use the word industry. How important is it to for someone in a business to learn, number one, and also to understand the industry you're in, the nuances of the industry, how things work?
Well, it's
'Cause
critical, really,
yeah,
especially today when things will change from month to month. I mean, if you look at the evolution of AI, now Compass actually had predictive AI for the last 6 or 7 years, but it really has come into the forefront in the last 2 or 3 years. And I have a friend who creates entire shows using AI tools, and he seeks them out, he masters them, and is able to produce everything from his basement studio, which is pretty wild. And that takes a lot of concentration, a lot of discipline, and a lot of learning.
mm,
So anyone who's interested in any field would really need to stay abreast of everything happening every day. I know that's challenging, but it's also fun
yeah,
because you're dealing with something new all the time. When I got into cable, cable was still a very, very young industry. When I started at NBC, there were only three networks. There was no cable, there was no internet. So you were
yeah,
dealing with that world. And I still remember when I edited, at first, we edited on 2-inch videotape and we physically would cut the tape. I didn't do it, the engineer would do it,
yeah.
and they called it Editech back then, and that's how we made promos. Of course, then when I got to the Joan Rivers show, I worked with one of the very first digital editing tools called an Avid, and I think we were the first to use the Avid for promotions, but it was a very archaic version of what they have today. Of course, today
Mm,
you could just on a laptop do as much as we could do in multi-million-dollar editing rooms back then. So
ex-
getting back to your question, learning is very critical. You can't rest on your laurels. You have to keep evolving. And
mhm,
again, if you like what you're doing, if there's a passion for it, it will be fun.
yeah. I know friends of mine are in the content creating business on their own shows and this kind of thing. And I said, how did you learn all of this? And it was kind of like an immersion. They just went into it. They were interested in it. Kind of the same way you say your father started this and you were intrigued by it. And they said, this started from here. I just learning and all of this self-taught, no college degree, no nothing. And they were able to become large influences, money and all those things came about as a result of that. So if you were to talking to people, younger people, what advice would you give them as it relates to careers and how this thing could possibly play out and what they would need to know in trying to guide their career?
Well, I would say you have to find your passion and embrace it. Play full out. Be as enthusiastic about it as you possibly can. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for that today, especially in the way social media has evolved. You see very creative people coming out of the woodwork, just doing something special and finding their way to do it. Network, find people who are in your field, attend events, go to those events with a business card, or at the very least some kind of a digital business card that you can meet people and trade cards with, trade information with, and stay in touch with them. Sometimes it's just as simple as letting them know that you're there and you're evolving, you're doing something. I've mentored a lot of young people who did that with me. They would stay in touch with me, and of course I would respond in kind, because it's sort of what people do. They pay it forward. They're happy to help you.
Pay it forward. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I always will respond to people, regardless of how dumb the request may be. I will always respond in a kind way. And
Mhm.
I know friends of mine, oh no, I don't even, I just click away, I delete all of it. So what are you doing to pay this forward? You're where you are. Someone helped you get there, but you say you're not going to reach back. And it always causes them to pause and give it some thought. Um, where did all this come from? I mean, where did all of this come from? Reaching back, pulling people in, being curious. You mentioned your father with the film or the cameras and all of those kind of things.
Well, he used to make 8 millimeter home movies, and he would play around with single frame animation, which fascinated me. When you take one frame at a time and move something, he loved doing that, and that's where I got it from. I know that, and I love paying tribute to him, because I'd be maybe an accountant or something if I hadn't had that passion. But it comes down to passion and curiosity,
Yeah.
and once you immerse yourself in something, it kind of happens by osmosis, that you start learning, especially if you're keeping up with the latest technology, you're keeping up with what's happening online. There's so much information, so many websites that you can find information about the field that interests you. And I think that's something that you have to have a curiosity about. Uh,
Hmm.
I, I, I've dealt with people. In fact, just the other day, someone told me, "Oh, my niece is interested in television. Will you talk to them and video?" I said, "Sure. Why not? Let's see if I can inspire somebody else." A good friend of mine has a son who's interested in film from a very young age, and now he's a director. And I know I
Hmm.
had some influence on him as part of that.
Mm.
Um, Around to the studios and gave him some insights. So it's really about passion. It's about
Mm.
passion and curiosity.
Yeah. Well, since we always interview quite a few people, varied backgrounds, and when you mentioned that, I thought about a doctor we had on who was a lung transplant surgeon, and he no
Mm,
longer does that. He's now in consulting. He's talking about wellness and all these kinds of things. We had another attorney on, another doctor who has a medical practice, emergency room medical person, and now
mhm.
she's into wellness. She gives these seminars and all of this stuff, and people are realizing later on they may have had a passion, but there's something else that's kind of pulling them towards that. They didn't close it down, and they started exploring. So I say, I know accountants that are not accounting. I know doctors that are not doctoring. I know lawyers that are not lawyering. So when these kids come out of school and they have this passion to going, I'm going to become this. As you said, I could have become an accountant, and they want to go to school for that. How do we as parents have these kind of conversations to talk about exploring and
Well, you
what?
have to be open to the child's curiosities, and I keep using the word passion, because that's really what drives everything, is the
Yeah.
ability to go the extra mile, to learn, to create. And it also takes guts. You're out there doing something creative, and you're going to be measured by your peers.
Hmm.
I think encouraging your kids to be who they are, give them some insight into the realistic
Really?
viability of doing that as a career. Is it something
Yeah.
you can do for long term? Is it lucrative enough to make it worthwhile? There are people, though, today who grow up and say, I just want to be an internet star. And some of them have actually been very successful. Their parents embraced their idea, and today they make a lot of money on the internet doing that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, I would certainly say I've seen some people involved in that world, and I take my hat off to them, because it's hard. It's hard to build a following. What is it that you are that makes people want to watch you every day?
You versus someone else. I had lunch with one of our colleagues the other week, and the next day, we met on a Thursday. The next day, she was waiting for acceptance letters to come from universities. That was the date everything was supposed to come out. And her daughter wanted to go to one school, and it was all these things. And I said, by the way, I said, what is tuition now? She says, on average, about 90 to 95,000 per year. And I almost fell out of my chair, because I had never asked that question to anybody. 90,000. So 4 years, you're spending close to $500,000,
Right,
investing in someone to become something, and that may not work out. So I could never get that out of my mind, spending that amount of money, because when my kids went to school, it was nowhere near that.
right.
But again, talking about careers and what are people seeking, and you've gone through changes and all those kinds of things. I know you mentioned, you mentioned the word about passion and all of that. This is what a lot of parents are facing now. Careers, how you want to do this, or I don't know what I want to do, but go ahead and take this kind of study or whatever it is. Any advice would you?
Well, you have to embrace whatever it is they think they want to do, even if it's not something you agree with. They will discover on their own whether they really want to do it. I agree that the price of learning that has now gotten out of hand. I've heard 60 to 90,000 is realistic, and that's a whole lot of money to spend on someone who doesn't know what they want to do. But the hope is they will find it, or they'll use those skills later on in the field they finally embrace. So I have sage advice. Every child is different. But there is some spark in there that you can seek out. You can find out what makes them tick. If you're close to your kid, if you spend time with them and nurture them and empower them, I think you can, eke out what it is that they think they want to do, and you have to support it. I don't see any other option, because if you try to force them into a field, they're going to reject it.
Yeah. A young lady told me, she said that she was an accountant. And I asked her why was that, and she said because her father was an accountant, all her uncles were accountants, and they said, become an accountant, you'll always have a job. She went through the whole CPA route, got that first job, and realized I cannot do this for the rest of my life, and she pulled out of it and went a different directions in doing that. So let's go back to your style of leadership. You have all this wealth of knowledge with startups and all these kinds of things. What if you had to describe your leadership style, what would it look like? Or what would it sound like?
Well, I would say that there are two schools of leadership. There is empowerment, collaboration, nurturing, and putting positive energy towards your team. Or there's the more fearful leadership, where you just have to get something done. And I think it's pretty obvious which one is more fun and more productive. I find that if I give people that sort of nurturing and give them authority in empowerment, they will work harder than I expect them to. I've seen this over and over again. They over-deliver because they feel that they are being respected and given some authority. And of course, if you don't agree what they're doing, you have to negotiate that. You have to figure out what it is that you can do that they will agree with. But basically, it's about being kind. It comes down to that. In every instance, even when I'm working in real estate now, I work with some very, very what word should I use? Persnickety agents. Who they have a lot of success behind them. They have great egos. You have to find that way to make them feel comfortable when you're doing a negotiation, that they feel like they're winning. And it's tricky. it's one of the skills I learned along the way. They actually have classes. I'm a certified negotiation expert, according to
Okay.
the
Yeah.
State Board of New York. And that you go through all these tricky situations with people who are very difficult to work with. So I would say that your ability to negotiate and show diplomacy with your employees, and then, of course, giving them the free rein to do what it is they're supposed to do, be creative, tackle a project, direct a show, whatever it is, you have to give them that free rein. But of course, you're controlling the ultimate. It's your responsibility ultimately. So you do have to control the final product.
You know, I was triggered when you mentioned that, because this morning I read an article on negotiation, the styles of negotiation, and it was in another post, and I was like, this is interesting, and the way that you approach win-win, or that we share on all these kinds of things. And I'm thinking, we do that in real life, but maybe we don't know the so-called science behind it. And
Oh, it's
last week,
really interesting. Yeah, keep going.
no, go ahead. No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Well, there are 4 different styles of negotiation. I won't go into great detail here about that now, but you sort of have to size up the person you're negotiating with and figure out how to approach them. One of the simplest tricks is what we call mirroring, where if they're sitting with their hands folded like you are, I should sit with my hands folded, and it kind of helps the entire conversation move forward. It's very interesting, very psychological. And then there's neuro-linguistic programming, which is essentially using certain power words to connect with that person. But, you know, I start almost every negotiation with the word respectfully, so that it puts them at ease, that they know that I am interested in appeasing them. And that works. It works. It softens the conversation. The other thing I like to do a lot, I have a passion for music and comedy, and I'm pretty good at improvising. I've actually studied improvisation for fun, and I've used it so much in my career, that ability to turn on the brain and think on the spot, kind of like what we're doing now, really.
Yeah.
But if you can find the humor in the situation, it immediately relieves the tension. And it could be something that you have common ground with. It could be something happening in the room. It could be just finding a play on words. And I use this a lot, especially in real estate now, where if I can put the client or the seller or the buyer at ease, it makes everything go easier. They sort of forget, they drop their defenses.
Yeah. And it's a more fruitful conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
As a result of that, I wanted, here was a comment that came in from Dr. Milton Perkins. Thank you for listening in. He says, tuition ridiculous. A student, no matter how bright, will never recoup that level of investment. And when she told me the 90,000, I said, that's close to $500,000 you're going to spend. If you know, getting back and forth, room and board, clothing, and all that, never recoup that level of investment. That's something to think about. And I think, based on what she told me, I think a lot of parents are going through that. Ade, who's executive producer of the show, I had a discussion like this the other week about his daughter. Janique is maybe 3-4 years old, and his thoughts on this whole college tuition thing. Anil said, good evening from Karachi. I'll just say a quick hello to everybody. Jim Moy, who I was hanging out with in Washington, D.C., the other week, big shot lawyer out of DC, a very dear friend who was also my neighbor when I lived in Saudi Arabia. Pop Goes the Culture TV says, looking forward to this conversation. And Peter Piccinini, who is he is one of the best listeners, and he was also a prior guest. It says it's always a great way to start the weekend. So I think we've touched on some things here that, not only for careers, but even in thinking in terms of younger people coming in and trying to move to the next level of their careers and trying to choose that. So my thought has always been, and this is when we kind of came up with the anchor of the show, was to talk to people like yourselves who started here and you were going here and something happened, and then you readjusted and you consistently readjusted until you found your sweet spot and trying to get to where you are today.
You always have to be ready to pivot. I can't tell you how many of my friends, very, very talented people, stayed in one field and only mastered that one field. And then the company was sold or merged and they found themselves out of a job. And it's shocking to know these people, in my opinion, I have such great respect for them, that they really could not find another career path quickly that they could embrace. Actually, many of them have gone into real estate because it's a field that has similarities to marketing and the world that I lived in. But if you're stay open, you're flexible, and you allow yourself to explore new journeys. I know someone who just interviewed. He's on the older side, and he interviewed for a marketing job, and the job wasn't something he had a lot of experience in, but it was certainly interesting. He goes, "Well, gee, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that." And I looked at him and I said, "If you don't try something new, you're just going to wither away." And he kind of got the message, but that particular interview did not work out for him. So I'll leave it at that. So you really have to be ready to pivot. And again, be hungry for knowledge at all times. It's something you need to do as a daily discipline, whether it's just checking your news feed for the appropriate information that appeals to you, reading whatever trades are available. And they're all online and they're all free for the most part. We used to have subscriptions to everything back in the day. So much easier now.
Yeah. So I asked you a question earlier about how do you learn? I asked that question because a lot of my clients are C-level people, the so-called big shots of industries. And I'm always intrigued when I say, tell me about something you read. Tell me about an article you read or a show you watched that was kind of propel you into thinking or rethinking something. How are you learning? And I get this blank look. They say, "You know what, Ron, I'm so busy. I don't get a chance to do this and that and the other." And I'm like shocked. I don't know why I said be shocked, but go ahead.
I check the news feeds every day. First thing I do is I get up and check the news feeds to see what happened overnight that I might be interested in. I go to as many seminars as I can. Now, for example, Compass is really good about education, online education. We have 2 to 3 seminars a week that are really meaningful. To pinpoint one is a little difficult because they are all very in-depth, and they do a really good job of training the agents to understand the latest and the greatest. But I will network at events. There are a lot of conferences that you can actually attend for little or no money, and you can be there all day and learn from people and ask questions and soak it in. And usually you if there are trade papers still being printed, they will hand those out. There's so much information out there, much more than when I was building my career. It's just the way to go. I would say, when I mentioned, you said a program, I would say $1 Million Listing was one of the shows that inspired me to get into real estate, because I kind of got to see what they did. Now, of course, that's made for television. Disclaimer. You
don't understand the back end of all of that.
So fortunately, I knew enough about television to know how it worked. But I found it intriguing, and my love of New York is paramount. I just want to mention that the video that you ran at the beginning of the show is something I produced, Winter in Central Park.
Really?
The notion is that about 20% of my social media is about real estate. About 80% of it is about my other interests. So I give people a sense of my passions, my interests, my hobbies, music and comedy, pop culture, my musical heroes, for example. I like to share that stuff online. But I also love to celebrate New York and its beauty. I run a series of vintage photos of particularly recognizable areas like Times Square to show people what it was like in the past in New York, how New York has evolved. And I get great responses to that. The Winter in Central Park is a series of films I do about New York, little short videos to, catch their eye. Also, we know that video has more impact than just simple static images. So I like to mix it up. And you can create stock. I used stock footage for that. I didn't shoot any of it. And you can do things like that very inexpensively for your field. There are a number of online subscription services that aren't very expensive at all, that you can
Yeah.
create lots of different videos that might relate to what you're doing. Or if you're brave enough, get on camera yourself.
Try it on yourself. That gives the full version of who Ed is. I'm not just real estate. I do a lot of things. I have a lot of interests. So if you think of someone in the real estate business, that video that you showed shows New York City snow, always beautiful. The day after it's not, but you were able to capture something there and building a brand. Give us kind of an insight on brand building. How do you build a brand? And now I'm in real estate. My brand was TV. Can I mix brands and create a different persona?
Well, I think it's worked for me because people know me from television, and I have a lot of media clients, people who I've known and worked with in the past, have contacted me. And I think putting that media spin on real estate helps keeps me in front of their face because they're curious to see what it is, particularly the static images. Because as you're scrolling through your feed and you stop on a black and white photo of the reservoir that is now the public library. There was a big reservoir there.
Yeah.
You'll stop and look. You'll say, "Oh, wow, 42nd Street. Look at that." And oh, it's from Ed. And that keeps my name out there. So the answer is you can build a brand, but the things that I try to promote are my values. I'm honest. I have a fiduciary responsibility to my clients. I try to project that in the work I do, and I'm informative. I share information about the real estate industry and what's going on in the New York market that I think is relevant to everybody. And I do sort of one-on-ones with people who I think might be buying. I create collections for them that I actually create them. I don't have to be involved in them viewing the collection, so they can decide whether or not they want to go forward, sort of make their job easier. And so I think some of it is a combination of taking the brand that you've already built and merging it with a new brand. And I think I've been pretty successful at that.
Talking about branding, when I first started in this business, we were all working together. I was in HR, but I knew I didn't want to be HR. I didn't want to anything connected with those two letters. And I learned that over a period of time. And once I became more acclimated towards the business, understanding business needs, and I looked at myself, I kind of branded myself as a workforce architect. I can take strategy and build a workforce plan around that. And I found that was more enlightening when I told somebody that I was a workforce architect versus selling them on an HR person. It changed everything. So I know that branding is important, and lots of times we get into these fields and we're doing things and we're known as one-shot deal. This is all that you do beyond that. So I love the way that you kind of gave us more insight as to what that meant.
Well, I recall that, you were based in Manhattan, but you made a point of wandering around the Westport studios, which is where I worked, at least once a week. And I think that goes a long way to reaching out to the people in the other markets. I will tell you that the CEO of Compass, Robert Refkin, goes to one market a week. As I think I've mentioned, actually I didn't mention it online, but we have about 34,000 agents around the country. Yeah. And he goes to one market a week, spends time with the people, the teams in that specific office. And once a week he does an open house. He attends an agent's open house here in New York, or possibly in the market he's in, with his family. He brings his 3 children and his wife, and they come as if they were consumers checking it out. He will visit an open house a week. And, he doesn't have to do that. But that kind of hands-on, face-to-face, eye-to-eye experience is what makes a good leader. And, I applaud you for your reaching out with the CEO series every week consistently. People know they're going to get a nugget of learning from the show.
Yeah. You mentioned for the people that don't know, our offices were in New York City, but our TV studio was in Westport, Connecticut, which was an hour drive, good traffic, Tappan Zee Bridge coming up on my side. And every Friday I drive up there. I'd leave at like 5 in the morning and I'd get there maybe 7, depending upon traffic. The old Tappan Zee was there then. There's a new bridge now. And people, why do you go up there? I said, because I don't know anybody in TV. That's the division. I want to sit there. And I'd sit there, I'd sit in to see the shows that are produced. I sit in the meetings and all those kind of things. And I learned more about TV. So I say that to say, when I work with leaders, I said, how much do you know about the business? Because I noticed that Martha sometime would come in and she would see something on someone's computer. She'd pull up a chair. She said, what is this? And they'd walk her through whatever it was. And she and Sharon, I said, if I wanted to be a leader, I wanted to learn the way that they did it, because they were always involved in whatever you were doing and it was curious to them. They would try it and figure that out. I also had a client, Sephora, in Singapore, mentioned the same thing. Their leaders, once a month, they have to work in a retail store, choose the retail store, and they have to spend some time working inside the store, talking to customers, understanding it from that vantage point, as opposed to being in the gilded cage and I'm making decisions and I have no idea as to what's going on beyond that. So that's kind of where that came from my side in putting that together. So thank you for mentioning that about my Friday sojourns up there. If you could go back and give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be?
Wow. Well, I kind of learned along the way that you have to take in every job with open eyes, open arms, open ears, that you have to check your ego at the door, as they say, and make sure that you are absorbing the culture, the process, the people along the way. And in the early days, when I, for example, went down to AOL, it was such a different universe and a different pace. It took me a little while to understand that, but I did. This was in Dulles, Virginia, and I, being a New York producer, had a different approach. It took me a little while. It was a little bumpy, but I got there. I think the other thing is always get your hands dirty. And I think, you traveling up to Connecticut is part of that. I use that phrase loosely. I recall there was a time when I worked at WNBC that I had a new boss. He was a superstar promotion manager. He came from Chicago. And on his very first day, he was wined and dined by all the executives, spent time with the network people. This is a local station manager in the owned and operated markets, where the biggest market, where he was considered kind of a hot ticket. And okay, as he was putting his coat, he noticed that I was still a coordinator. I was preparing scripts for about 200 affiliates to read the copy. What we would do is put the copy on the teleprompter, and there were 3 copies of it. One went to the talent, one went to the prompter, one went to the director. And they were separated by carbon paper. This is the old carbon paper that we don't use anymore, that allowed you to make separate copies. And it was literally a dirty experience, perforating them and tearing them apart. And he was about to leave. He's all dressed up in his suit. He's putting on his coat. And he sees me at my desk, ripping with this mountain of scripts. And don't you know it, he took off his coat, he took off his suit jacket, sat down with me on his very first day and helped me rip these scripts apart. And that taught me a valuable lesson. Get your hands dirty. Get in there and do the job with people so they have a respect for you, because you love them, that you're part of the same workforce that they are. And it goes a long way in everything I've ever done, where I'll spend time making sure that I'm on the level of the people I'm dealing with, and they give you great respect for that.
Mm-hmm. So when you think about what you're doing now, as we begin to close out, what are you most excited about going forward?
Well, every sale, every purchase, even rentals is a new adventure. You get to know people, you get to understand their hopes and dreams, you get to understand their preferences. Some of them are a little persnickety, but at the same time, they're people just wanting to achieve their next dream. I think having a place to live is probably the most important decision you make in life. And so you want to be very respectful of that. And I find it's a journey. Each one is very different. So I kind of enjoy that unknown that I'm encountering. And certainly it's a challenge to be in front of that. But looking forward to more of that. I know we're running out of time. here, so I want to be
Okay,
respectful.
cool. So one of the goals of the show, as I talked to how did the show evolved over a period of time, is to bring people in like yourselves who've achieved. I'm going to say achieved,
Hmm.
and to walk us through what the real picture looked like, because we get fooled by this linear piece, but to give us kind of insight as to here's how the journey was for me. Here's what the journey was about for me. So, do you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to leave the audience before we close it?
Well, if it sounds like I've just had a smooth and easy career, that is not the case. Every job is a hard job. You work
Yeah.
long hours. Sometimes I actually took a place up at Martha so I could work after midnight. I couldn't drive home to
Yeah.
Manhattan. Every job that you do has its twists and turns. Be flexible, be agreeable, be open, and you will succeed.
Okay. Cool. Ed, thank you so much. It was great having you on, and I was glad that we had the reunion that we did
Yeah,
right
wonderful.
before New Year's. That was a lot of fun, and glad to reconnect. And thank you for being a guest. I need you to hold on for a minute as we begin to close
Sure,
out. Thank you so
sure.
much.
Take care.
Take the CEO series with you anywhere, anytime. All episodes are now available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and major streaming platforms. It's not just an interview. It's a masterclass in leadership.